In this episode of Another Zelda podcast, Celeste and Carlos get together to talk about some of their favorite unsolved mysteries in the Zelda games.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another Zelda podcast. Now you might have noticed that this is not David speaking. I am Celeste, the co-producer and a blog writer, and with me today, in lieu of Kate, is Carlos Gomez, who is a contributing writer and occasional guest on the podcast as well. Hey Carlos.
Hi, I'm definitely not Kate, so...
So some of you
just
may
in
know...
case my tone sounded a little off.
Some of you may recognize Carlos from being in some of the quiz episodes, and also when we were dealing with 2020 and COVID, we shared on Twitter some things that we were doing, and Carlos shared these beautiful videos of his location. And I'm very jealous, but he's back in the States, so I don't know if he gets to see those venues anymore.
Only, when I'm looking through the reel on my iPhone, unfortunately. But those were some great memories and some very, very beautiful locations, beautiful beaches. It was awesome.
I'm so jealous. Well, if you're not familiar with Another Zelda podcast, if this is your first time joining us, we're fans of the Legend of Zelda series, and we don't claim to be experts. We're really just enthusiasts. We celebrate the series. We believe in elevating other fans and building a great community. So sometimes we get some things wrong. Sometimes we forget the names of things, but we know our listeners will help us remember.
That's for sure. What's interesting is also being somebody who listens to the show, sometimes I'll pick up on something that maybe is a little off. And then sometimes I'll say what I think, and then we'll come and find out later that, I hadn't looked into the Hyrule Historia as accurately as I believed I had. So, as fans, we're always learning new things.
Absolutely. And I think that's what I love about this series, because different people will have different theories on the same thing. And that opens my mind, or sometimes people pay attention to things I missed in the game that I was playing most recently. And I'm talking about it like Breath of the Wild. I'm still discovering new things, as I'm sure you are too, Carlos, every time you pick it up.
Well, I think that's what makes it so interesting is you can literally walk across the same patch of grass, and each time you're either going to find a new Korok seed that you didn't know about, except for those fans out there who've somehow found them all. Or, there's a new thing to bomb, or there's a new way to get past a puzzle that maybe you've already beaten before. If I'm not playing through and seeing something new, I'm seeing somebody on YouTube come up with some cool or amazing jaw-dropping way to relive the experience. And I think that's what makes Breath of the Wild so unique and so amazing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, listeners, I have been on some episodes, so it's nice to be back again. If you've read the title of the episode, Favorite Unsolved Mysteries of the Zelda series, I guess you could say that David's location is an unsolved mystery. Why isn't he here tonight? Oh, I hope he's okay. Maybe we'll find him somewhere in Hyrule or Termina. But I hope that you enjoy this topic with us. Now, I'd like to introduce Carlos because, unlike some of the other writers, he has not been on as many episodes. So, Carlos, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you get involved with AZP? What do you do for fun? Your favorite Zelda game? Anything you want to share?
Well, all right. So what's interesting is I actually got linked up with AZP in 2019. I know that my first article, I believe, was released in July of 2019. And the way it all sort of happened or came about was, I believe David was commenting on a random Nintendo or video game website. And I think he'd referenced AZP in some way, shape, or form. And I semi-jokingly mentioned like, oh, well, if you need a writer, here I am, kind of thing. And then we linked up, we talked about stuff. I had done a few blogs for other random websites up at that point. And I, sent him a few things, and it was nice, actually refreshing to talk to somebody who had the same kind of passion that I do for Zelda. Like, I love a lot of video games, Mario, Metroid, but there's something about Zelda that's a little different. And it was really nice and refreshing to talk to somebody that had that same kind of passion. And that's what really drew me to the AZP team, because everyone here has that same passion. And that's really what got me started on this path. As far as my interests, I would say fantasy and sci-fi, stemming from Zelda. I often talk about how, growing up, Zelda was my favorite video game and Peter Pan was my favorite cartoon movie. I guess I never really grew up. Trust me, my wife will agree to that. But, and then it's funny, you look and there's a lot of similarities between Link and Pan, which I believe Miyamoto at some point had referenced that actually a lot of inspiration came from Peter Pan. But I grew up with that love of fantasy because, Zelda was always sort of my escape, my way to go somewhere else that was magical and interesting. So that's sort of where my passion for this kind of stuff came from.
Oh, I love that. And listeners, unfortunately, Carlos and I are not in person. I would absolutely love to be in person with Carlos. I think we'd have a lot of fun. We could talk Zelda. He could tell me about the Chargers. I could talk to him about the New Orleans Saints. Gosh. Okay, Carlos, who in the Zelda series do you think would make a great quarterback?
Ooh. What is it? Who was in Skyward Sword? Who was that big brutish guy? Was it
Groose?
Crump? Is that that big giant guy that was always sort of chasing around after Link and Zelda?
Oh, the redhead guy? Groose? Yeah. Groose, yeah.
Yeah. I think he would be, if not a quarterback, definitely he'd be my linebacker. That's for sure. Actually, you know what? I take that back. I think Ganondorf, if there's someone who's calculated, it's going to be him. And I think that's what you need for that position. You need, somebody like Ganondorf who's willing to calculate out the risks and take the shot when it's needed. So.
Oh. Now, what do you think? I think the Gorons would be really good for defense.
Yeah, the Gorons would definitely be good defense. I'm not sure what the Kokiri would be. Maybe running backs. They'd be small and elusive. I don't know.
Oh gosh, it'd be very easy to lose them. Imagine playing football, American football, against the Kokiri, like in the Minish Cap. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, they just they'd be hard to catch. It'd be like, you ever watch that old Disney cartoon? It's Mickey and Donald, and they go up and they're messing with the giant,
Yes.
I think it'd be like that, fee, fi, fo, fum kind of thing. Yeah.
Like Jack and the Beanstalk.
Yeah. Because I think it'd almost be like we were too slow, or, any of the other creatures would be too large and slow to catch them.
Gosh. Now we're just mixing so many different worlds, but something that we can talk about that listeners are very familiar with would be listener feedback. David provided some to me for this episode, and I'm really excited. I remember when I first started listening to AZP, and I'd write in and they'd read some of my comments or questions, suggestions, whatever it is I provided. And I believe you used to do the same, huh, Carlos?
Well, I definitely wrote in a few times to provide my own commentary. I think what's cool about this show is that there's so much dynamic kind of conversations that are happening. And, I think the team does a great job of sort of including the listeners in the process, making them a part of the journey as well. Mm-hmm. And so I always enjoyed being able to sort of offer my thoughts. And then, just hearing such a diverse group of people having, feedback that I would never even think of, or having some sort of relevant understanding of some of the source material, because there is so much lore, there's so much nuanced information, and it's surprising how much more there is, even if you think that you're an aficionado of Zelda in general.
100%. So let's get started with this listener feedback.
Let's do it.
Okay, the first one is from YouTube, and this is from Jason Stimpson, who commented on The Legend of Zelda as an RPG, another Zelda podcast, season 4, episode 10. So Jason says, "Love this podcast. Have been listening on Spotify for a while. It's really convinced me to try the games I haven't in the past. Wind Waker, Link's Awakening, Majora's Mask." Ooh, well, thank you for writing in, Jason. We really appreciate that you're listening, and hopefully you're also reading our blogs. We would love for you to comment on those as well. So, Wind Waker, Link's Awakening, Majora's Mask. Have you played all of those, Carlos?
Yes, and I will always advocate to anyone on Earth that Majora's Mask is that title that you should take a dare on. I think a lot of times people maybe find that one a little different. The structure, the time issue is, you're on the clock when you play that game. But that's one of those games that once you get the rhythm down, once you sort of figure out the mechanics of it, it's probably one of the richest stories in all of Zeldadom. Is that a term? Well, it is now. You heard it first here, AZP. But really, it's one of those games that once you really get immersed in it, it really fleshes out Zelda in general.
It's beautiful. It's a little dark, but it's one of my probably top 5 Zelda games, 100%. And Carlos has written a lot about Majora's Mask on our blog.
Hence me being such a fan of it. There's a lot of mystery in that, and the fact that the turnaround time for that game to be released was such a short period. The effort that they put into it to actually put out a quality product, it's very impressive.
I agree. And Link's Awakening and Wind Waker are also solid titles. Link's Awakening, I don't want to spoil anything, but if you like Super Mario Brothers 2.
well, so interesting. Carlos fact is Link's Awakening, that was the very first game I could say that I owned myself from the Zelda series. I remember getting a Game Boy for Christmas. I must have been 9, 10, somewhere, not dating my dinosaur self. And I'm talking about the old school Game Boy kids. I'm talking about the one where like you had to sit under a lamp or something, and I just remember being so amazed at how much that they were able to pack into that game. Matter of fact, I believe, and don't quote me on my fake news here, but I believe that originally the game designers were trying to find a way to put A Link to the Past on the Game Boy platform. That was their original intent. They were trying to find like somebody's going to like Google and find me wrong here, but I think that was their initial intent, but it sort of got scrapped and it quite worked out. And so I believe they sort of reworked it into its own game, which is why you also see so many interesting cameos. There's a Yoshi doll, sorry, spoiler alert, Yoshi doll in there, stuff like that. Anyway, so that's that one.
We did eventually get A Link to the Past on the Game Boy Advance.
Yes.
I did play that one as well.
Well, and it's interesting because that game is such a centerpiece. It's sort of, if you look at it, it's almost like you redid the very first title from the NES over again with the top down kind of method of play. And then, they based, like I said, I believe Link's Awakening off of it. And then, was it Link Between Worlds? Was that the one with the paintings?
Yes.
Yeah. Which, was sort of a revamping to that original title. So it's a really benchmark game, Link to the Past.
Great. Love that game. That was my first Zelda title. And he also mentioned Wind Waker, which if you love exploration and you love the open seas, you're in for a big treat with the Wind Waker.
Yeah. And the cartoon, it grew on me. I will tell you, that's one of the most beautiful games, and don't want to spoil it, but has probably my favorite ending out of any Zelda game.
It's poignant. I love it. Thank you for writing in, Jason. So our next one, I can't tell where this comes from. It might be a Facebook message to David or the AZP Facebook page, but this one is from Alexis LeBlanc. Oh, we have lots of LeBlancs where I live. Hey guys, Alexis from Quebec, Canada here. Oh, that explains it. The French influence. Okay. I'm a fan since January 2021, and I just wanted to tell you that I really love this podcast and wanted to contribute in some way. Keep up the great work. And hopefully one day we'll all get to play Breath of the Wild 2 and then listening to you talking about it. Okay, bye. Carlos, we're not going to give away too much, but at the time of this recording regarding Breath of the Wild 2, we did get some exciting news recently.
We really did. And I would love to share, but there's an embargo on me from the AZP team. So we'll let David handle all that stuff. But it's very exciting. Very, very exciting.
So by the time this episode comes out on our blog, we should have our reactions to that news. That's all we will say. And Carlos is very thorough in his responses. So thank you for that. And thank you, Alexis. We're very excited that you're listening. All right. The next one is from YouTube. Okay. This is from Poppy Schofield. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your last name. and they commented on the music of Skyward Sword, which was Season 2, Episode 4. Poppy says, "Hi, AZP. My name is Poppy, and I love your podcast. I listen to your podcast every day. It makes me really happy. You've made such a positive impact on my mornings. Thank you for all that you do. And remember, it's dangerous to go alone." Oh, thank you, Poppy. It is dangerous to go alone. I couldn't make it in my life if I didn't have family, friends, and Zelda fans.
Well, and I was going to say the AZP team is pretty tight knit. We definitely come together. I know the listeners, they hear the podcast, but there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, a lot of conversations that happen, in between the lines, so to speak, and everyone's really, really down to earth and feels like a family, which I've been very, very grateful for, I know. So thank you for being a part of the family too.
Oh, thank you, everybody listening and all the team. I love everybody, and I'm happy that we can make you so happy, Poppy. All right. The next one is also on YouTube, and this is from Tony Gibson. I recognize that name. He's commented on a few things before, and he commented on the music of Twilight Princess, a pretty recent episode at the time of this recording, from Season 5, Episode 8. Tony says, "I love these music episodes of AZP. Twilight Princess is the only main console Legend of Zelda game I haven't played, and this just makes me want to play it even more."
You must.
"I would love for you to do a music of Wind Waker episode. Thanks for keeping the show so fresh after all these seasons and keeping me and all the other Zelda fans hooked. Thank you, and keep up the great work, David, Kate, and crew." Oh, thank you very much, Tony. Okay, Carlos, can I tell you a nerd fact about myself regarding the Wind Waker?
I'm extremely excited for it, please.
I was in marching band and concert band in high school, and when Wind Waker came out and that opening started, that very Celtic sounding intro, I used to pretend that I was a drum major, and I would try to count the time in my living room.
No, that's pretty awesome. I mean, when I was a kid, I remember someone had a recording of me, which gratefully does not no longer exist. But they had me. I was in the bathtub singing Gilligan's Island. So I was like 5. So I think we all get inspired by certain pieces of music. We all get inspired, and that's awesome. You know what? We all are our own version of normal, and I think we should embrace that. Also, if you have any clips of that, we could definitely share that. Maybe.
And I love that the song was Gilligan's Island, kind of related to Wind Waker with all the islands. That's fantastic. Yeah. If that was when you were 5, I don't see why you can't do it now at your current age. Just
putting that out there. I mean, I have shown up to karaoke. I don't do well, but I will show up.
What would you say is your favorite song from Wind Waker? Either a small tune or an actual locations tune?
Honestly, I really just sort of like the overture when he's sailing, because it sort of creates this feeling of adventure, which is what Zelda's all about. And I just sort of like how you feel like you're on a journey. And don't get me wrong, I think with the original version, there was a lot of lengthy sailing. But there's just something about that kind of music that makes you actually feel like you are going somewhere. And I always appreciated that.
I think musical composers are such geniuses because they evoke that sense of wherever you are. I really it's not a theme, but I really like the tune whenever an enemy shows up, that kind of violin sound. I like that. We're going to turn this into a Wind Waker music episode if I'm not careful.
I'm just trying to get you to start conducting. That's my only goal.
You don't want me to do that. Thank you so much, Tony, for writing in. All right, and the last piece of listener feedback we have is also from YouTube, Green Girl. And she commented on Breath of the Wild end of game thoughts from Season 1, Episode 4. What a throwback. Okay.
Wow, rewound the hands of time right there.
Exactly. I started listening to your podcast recently, and I love them. I've never been the type to play many video games, and Breath of the Wild is the only Zelda game I've played. But listening to your podcast has given me such a cool insider look to it all. I played Breath of the Wild for the first time probably 3 years ago, and I played consistently for a while but stopped recently. Now I'm waiting for the arrival of Breath of the Wild 2, aren't we all? It's also so awesome hearing you guys talk about future ideas when we now know what the next game will be about. Oh, that must be a very recent comment.
I know. It's great though, right? I mean, everyone's so excited. And the one thing Nintendo's really good at is creating a build-up. If you ever have time, I always encourage people to YouTube the Twilight Princess reveal, where they actually have the crowd in the room. And I mean, you can just feel the energy of everyone cheering. Nintendo's really good at getting those releases just right. They delay enough.
I agree. I agree. Oh gosh, I get so excited whenever someone says they've played only one Zelda game or they haven't played Zelda but they're interested in it. And I don't want to bombard them with my emotions or try to sway them, but I guess that whole, if you could erase your memory of a game that you played and start all over again, there are quite a few Zelda titles I would love that for.
Yeah, well, and I think Breath of the Wild is pretty amazing in the sense that it's super accessible.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't have to really know much about video games at all to really get started. I mean, if you have a general concept of nature or life, you know, oh, well, I want to walk this way, or I want to, there's a stick, I want to look at that stick. And I think that really helps bridge the gap between people who maybe haven't been interested in video games before, and, you know, makes it feel like a much richer experience for them, because there's not that pressure of having to know this is what every single button does now. I need to start mashing buttons now. It really helps you explore and grow into the game.
Beautifully said, Carlos. Thank you for that. And thank you so much for writing in, everyone. All right. So the moment I'm assuming everyone has been waiting for.
I can hear them on the edge of their seats while they're driving into work.
So this episode is about favorite unsolved mysteries of the Zelda series. And when I reached out to Carlos to see if and when he would be available to record an episode, I said, is there anything you want to talk about? We're thinking we could talk about favorites, because that's easy and you could probably never run out of that. So Carlos picked favorite unsolved mysteries. So I'd like to know what inspired you. What was your thought process? What qualifies as a mystery to you?
Well, for me, the mystery is or what I'm looking for is in-game mysteries that are created within the story or within gameplay of the title or the series itself. Because I believe that there's a lot of intentional mysteries left in the game, and Nintendo does that. The creators do that so that it sort of helps with like the world building by creating sort of a lore that you don't really know everything that happened with it, or making characters that maybe don't have such a clear-cut storyline. It sort of makes your brain fill in the gaps, or makes your brain excited to learn a little bit more. And I think that's one of the key things that has made Zelda such a rich franchise with staying power, is that it's able to put these little crumbs and tidbits that keeps our mind going.
I love that. And I love Easter eggs in Zelda 2. That's something else I enjoy, and how they connect the different games or even different series, like you were saying with Link's Awakening. And it kind of makes you wonder, okay, what's the bigger piece to this? And I cannot get over how much people can theorize on small details.
Well, yeah, and you know, what's cool is that I feel like the creators of Zelda are also fans themselves. And so they find little ways to add little pieces or tidbits. I remember I was playing the remake of Ocarina on the 3DS, and they randomly hid a picture of Skyward Sword. They had a Skyward Sword picture. Skyward Sword was getting re-released. And so it didn't have anything to do with gameplay, didn't have to do, but it was just a nice little thing to put in the game for fellow fans, hidden under a random crate, just so that we could find it, because they know we love the series as much as they do.
It's very heartwarming.
It really is.
So we both came up with some different mysteries, and I glanced at yours, but I didn't dive into them too much on the notes because I want to hear your thoughts. I want to be kind of have a fresh mind to it. So Carlos, why don't you get us started, since you came up with this topic? What's the first unsolved mystery you would like to discuss?
Well, the first unsolved mystery, I think, is probably one of the number one unsolved mysteries that anyone would think of when playing Zelda, especially if you played Ocarina of Time. And that's the Song of Storms paradox. That has stuck out to me forever. And I'm sure it sticks out to everyone else. So, for those of you who don't know, and spoiler alert here, but there is a portion in the game where you meet this man in a windmill as a child, and he ends up learning a song from Link, or vice versa. So basically, Link teaches him the song, but he learns the song from the man 7 years later as an adult to go back in time to then teach to the man. And so it's just sort of interesting, like, well, he technically couldn't have taught him the song if he hadn't have already taught him the song. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, that's a really great point. I hadn't even thought of that. I kind of just accepted it in the game.
Yeah, so as an adult, Link needs that song, and so the man in the windmill, he talks to adult Link and says, "There was this boy who taught me this song I can never get out of my head." A child Link doesn't know that song, and so as an adult Link learns it from that man, and then has to go back in time at some point as a child, and then teach the man the song to get the windmill moving and cause the storm to happen and all that kind of stuff. So it's one of those chicken before the egg. There's no real start. There's no real finish. And I always found that interesting. It always sort of tickled my brain. Have you ever watched Star Trek?
No, but I know what it is.
Okay, well, so, they have a lot of those kinds of episodes where they end up in these sort of like time loops. And that's basically what it feels like. It's this time loop. Link couldn't have taught him without having been taught by the person he, taught it to. And I just find that interesting. There's no rhyme, no reason. It's just a fun little mechanic that sort of gets your brain working.
Now you make me wonder another mystery associated with it. How the heck can Link make it rain inside? Where are the clouds?
Movie magic. No, video games, they imagination.
Imagination.
Yeah. Well, but it's really cool. And I think that it's a clever use of time. This was the first time I think Nintendo had really done this kind of thing where, they had the light world and the dark world for Link to the Past, but, playing with time, I think it gave them a cool opportunity to sort of do like a kind of tongue-in-cheek kind of exercise in this scenario.
That's a great one. Thank you for bringing that one up, Carlos. I hadn't even thought of it. Okay. This one's also related to Ocarina of Time for me, and maybe you have the answer. Okay. So there's a little boy when you're young Link, and you go to the graveyard in Kakariko Village, and he idolizes Dampé. He walks around the graveyard, and he's stomping around, and I think he carries like a little stick. And he's actually the one you sell the little skull mask to, if you decide to participate in that with the Happy Mask Salesman's mission. So he's known as Graveyard Boy, according to Zelda Dungeons information. I just called him Little Boy. And if you stop by the house on the left, right before your entrance to Death Mountain, and you try to enter it, someone will say how their son is out playing in the graveyard. You can never actually go into that house. And then when you're adult Link, it becomes the bazaar from Hyrule Castletown. So obviously the little boy lived there. His parents, guardians lived in that house. So what do you think he and his parents did? Like, do you think they fled during the 7 years that Link slumbered? Do you think they're somewhere else in Hyrule and we just don't recognize them? I have no idea what happened to that little boy.
Well, I have a guess, and, sorry to ruin everyone's day, but I would imagine they all fled to Castletown, and 7 years later, it's nothing but mummies. I'm just saying.
I think they're reheads.
I'm just saying. Well, actually, if you go, and you guys can try this at home, if you go and you attack one of the mummies and he falls down, and you just sort of watch him for a sec, sometimes the other mummies will walk over towards the mummy that's down, so they may be related. There may be. Wow, it just got real dark here on AZP, ladies and gentlemen.
We're talking about Graveyard Boy, and I like that you said try this at home. He means in the video game. He doesn't mean like
in the video game. Yeah.
Don't get a mummy.
The first ever illegal disclaimer on an AZP episode just happened, folks.
Well, If anybody's a lawyer, you could help us out there, right? Gosh, well, what's your next unsolved mystery, Carlos?
Okay, well, so as you know, I'm a huge fan of the original title. It's the one I fell in love with, and it probably has one of the number one catchphrases of all time. So Link's traveling around. You can burn a tree. There's, I think, a place you can bomb, and inside you find a moblin, and the moblin says it's a secret to everybody and gives Link money, whether it's a bunch of rupees. And I found this interesting because as a child, I'm playing this game and this is an enemy. This is somebody I would normally fight, but here he is giving me money. And so in my mind, I'm like, well, why is this moblin giving me money? Is he a resistance? Is everybody, not actually siding with Ganon? Is there like a force that is preparing and he's just trying to help me along because they don't like the rule of the tyrant themselves? Trying to think of it from a creator perspective, I mean, they had other sprites. They had a shop salesman sprite. They had an old lady sprite, the old man sprite. So they could have used someone else to convey that. But instead, every single time it's a moblin, and it's the moblin handing out money. And he makes a point of saying it's a secret to everybody. So he doesn't want anyone to know that he's actually helping you. And that's an interesting kind of idea or concept.
So he doesn't even attempt to attack you?
No, you just walk in, and there's like a little rupee, you touch it, and he says it's a secret to everybody.
I like the idea of him being against Ganon. That would be really cool.
Well, that title in the series is supposed to be sort of like a post-destruction kind of world, and so maybe the moblins are like, they're tired of it. Maybe they don't mind exactly how it was under Zelda and the King's Rule or whatever. So it's just an interesting thing, an interesting choice of sprite that they use for it. And it just, it's carried on today. I mean, there's other video games. I think in World of Warcraft, they had like a little thing going on where it was like a mission or something. It's a secret to everybody. It's a pretty common phrase now, and started with Zelda. So I thought that was interesting.
That's a good mystery right there. Okay. So maybe you could help me with this next one as well, Carlos. Origin of the Gossip Stones. So if you've played Ocarina of Time, you are familiar with those stones with the Sheikah eye symbol on them. If you strike them with your sword, they boing and they tell you the in-game time. If you put a bomb at the base of them, and the bomb explodes, they'll fire off like a rocket, and then they'll respawn in their location. And if you get the Mask of Truth from the Happy Mask salesman and you try to speak to one of the stones while wearing it, it'll actually share gossip with you. So
don't you get a fairy if you do Zelda's Lullaby or something by them too, or something along those lines?
Correct. Yes,
yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Good. Thank you for that. So they have the Mark of the Sheikah, and I need to know, how do they know so much about the goings on in the land? Where are they getting this? Are they just observing? Do they talk to one another in this chain of stones? Who put them there? So they have the Sheikah eye on them. Are the stones, the mask, and the lens of truth, which also looks like a Sheikah eye symbol, are they connected? What do you think?
Well, I think so. The one thing Nintendo and the Zelda creators are really good at is sort of reinventing things. And if you take Breath of the Wild as example, you have a Sheikah slate. In a way, that's sort of like a lens of truth in some ways, sort of reborn. And then what do? You put the slate under that big stone that drips, energy or knowledge into your Sheikah slate. So what if that's just another way of having one of those stones, except sort of reimagined? The Sheikahs are supposed to be this ancient, super advanced civilization. So I look at those stones as just an older version or the original imagining of what we have now in Breath of the Wild with those stone pillars. That's sort of my take on it.
Oh, thank you. Gosh. See, this is why I love talking about things with other people, because you just brought up something I hadn't even thought about. I didn't even cross my mind to bring up Breath of the Wild. That's amazing.
Well, so the way I see the series, I was always one of those linear people. I didn't have the multiple timelines in my mind. Obviously, it's canon now, so it is what it is. But I always just sort of imagined each game is just a retelling of every game. each game is just sort of a new memory of that same game. So anything that's in a previous title is just sort of a reimagining or a new vision of it, a fresh look. And since we all know that the Sheikah historically have been sort of this advanced or mysterious culture, that had this sort of hidden, maybe arcane kind of knowledge, I just sort of see the stones as an extension of that kind of power.
Awesome. That's a really
Because
good way to
I
look
know
at
they're
it.
gossip stones, but they're Sheikah stones, in my take.
Do you have any favorite secrets that they reveal? Mine is the tidbit about how the Gerudo go into Hyrule Castle Town sometimes to look for boyfriends. That tickled me so much when I first read that.
Well, now they're giving away, never give away ladies' secrets. That's what I always say. But mine actually is, and I'm going to butcher the name here, but Kapora Gabora. In one of them, it mentions that, what was it? He's a reincarnation of a sage.
Rauru, right? The Sage of
Yes,
Light.
and actually, yep, and that's that was supported in Hyrule Historia that it was Rauru.
That's a good piece of gossip right there. So it's not so much gossip as it is fact, I guess. It's not like
Yeah,
schoolyard gossip right there.
yeah. Everybody standing by the water fountain, telling secrets, trading stories.
What's your next one?
So this one actually, since the moment I saw it, has really piqued my interest. So there's a extra goddess in the Zelda game. So she's referenced in the Ocarina of Time, and then also referenced in the Arbiter Grounds of Twilight Princess, and that is the Sand Goddess, which is, I'm throwing the curveball in here. So, and it's only referenced by the Gerudo in a temple, right? So they have a temple, and you'll notice they have all these Sand Goddess statues. And I always found that really interesting because it's, other than those two kind of situations, not really ever referenced. And actually, in Breath of the Wild, they don't mention a goddess, but they have the 7 or the 8 heroines instead, which are also giant sand statues. And so I've always found that to be sort of, are those connected? Are these, a mystery? Why isn't this goddess sort of given the reference that maybe Din, Nehru, or Pharaoh are given? Or maybe she's a reference to one of them. I'm really big into history and mythology and lore, and this is a perfect example of world building. The game didn't give you much. They gave you a couple symbols, maybe a reference here and there, and some statues of this giant temple, and they just let your mind sort of explore it. And I that's what makes it amazing, and that's a mystery I would love to see explored further.
Do you think that the Sand Goddess is kind of like a fallen angel / fallen goddess type of figure where maybe she fell out of favor with Hylia, Din, Nehru, and Furor?
I think I think she could be, because I even thought about like maybe she's like the fairies, because the great fairies sort of got more and more deity powers. I think there's even a god of the horses, but it's basically just a fairy for horses. And so, is it sort of like a semi-deity in between, or perhaps just a representation of one of the goddesses in particular that Gerudo seem to gravitate towards? There's a lot of fire references at times with the Sand Goddess. All the temples having like these little flames and things. So I don't know, but it's an interesting thing to sort of scratch the brain with, right?
I love that temple, the Spirit Temple in Ocarina of Time.
Mm-hmm.
That's my favorite one.
Yeah, and it's big. It's sort of mysterious. At that point, the game's really starting to become more complicated, and so you have to sort of use your child and adult link, to the full extent. So it's always stuck out in my mind. What about you?
I have so many questions about the Gerudo as well. Like, why are they banned? Did they choose that lifestyle? And I don't know if in Breath of the Wild they are called thieves like they are in Ocarina of Time. I don't know if they have that designation quite as much.
I don't remember them being called that in Breath of the Wild, no. But it's interesting because they do have their own entire subculture, their own way of doing things, and it's super cool to have, because you figure the Hylians are the main culture, the main group, but to have this entire subgroup with their own deity, with their own sort of history and their own sort of lore, the fact that they made them an all-female tribe, I thought was cool and a unique take. Maybe going off sort of the Amazonian kind of ideal. And it's really interesting.
Oh, no, I love them. They're my favorite. They are my favorite group in the series. Well, Carlos, how about we take a break and we can finish up with our unsolved mysteries? And I'm really eager to hear what listeners think about the ones we've listed and the ones that are coming up.
Yeah, me too. And I'm sure that they probably have some that we didn't even think of today. So I'm excited to hear about that.
All right, we will be right back.
Welcome to our new podcast. Welcome to our new podcast.
This isn't working.
Agreed. I think we're going to have to do it turn by turn.
Well, now that you mention it, we are a brand new RPG video game podcast.
Our very existence hinges on turn-based gaming.
So join us on the Turn by Turn podcast, where we'll be talking about
Pokemon, Fire Emblem, Golden Sun, Shining Force, Mother, and so many more.
It's your turn to come and join us.
Jake, have you ever been looking for a definitive Nintendo ranking and can't seem to find it because it's just everybody's own opinion?
Honestly, all the time, Sam.
Well, I'm looking for someone to give us the answers.
Wait, you mean like a podcast made by two young, handsome men where they create a definitive top 5 list of all things Nintendo?
Should we just do it ourselves?
Yeah, that sounds fantastic.
Let's give it a shot. I'm Sam.
And I'm Jake.
And at Top 5 Nintendo, I'm going to give you my top 5 list.
And I'm going to give you my top 5 list.
And then we're going to duke it out and see what the real top 5 is.
And we are back. Maybe we found some other unsolved mysteries in our daily lives. I don't know, Carlos, but I'm really enjoying this topic because it's getting my gears turning in my mind. I'm now wanting to go replay every single Zelda game. Just quit my job, play every Zelda game.
Well, kids, we don't recommend quitting your job to play video games. But if you did, Zelda would be the game to do it for. I'll throw it out there. But no, I mean, there's so much. And like we said at the top of the show, it's that world building. Little crumbs that help make and create an entire picture that is the Legend of Zelda.
Absolutely. So, Carlos, we left off with the Sand Goddess. Are you ready to hear mine? Mine is from probably your favorite Zelda game.
Oh, let's do it. And now I'm even more excited.
And this has probably been answered, but I can't find an answer based on my research. Maybe I'm just not doing a good enough job of researching. But what is the origin of the Fierce Deity mask? Or just the Fierce Deity in general in Majora's Mask? So I was reading lore from the game on the Zelda fandom wiki. And the Fierce Deity, the mask itself, it is said to possess the merits of all masks, as well as the memories of all the people of Termina. If you obtain it in Breath of the Wild with the Majora's Mask amiibo, you learn this. Fierce Deity Mask. Legends say this mask was once worn by a hero from a world in which the moon threatened to fall. It looks scary, but wearing it offers fierce godlike power. So, are Majora and the Fierce Deity perhaps cut from the same cloth? Are they two sides of the same coin? So they're the 4 giants in Majora's Mask. Is the Fierce Deity a type of 5th figure, godlike figure, a deity from that world?
Well, from a personal standpoint, I think the Hyrule Historia, game references probably paint one picture, but the picture that makes me happy inside is that, they're somehow intertwined and related. I remember there's a point when you're actually going to fight Majora's Mask and you have the Fierce Deity mask. Majora is sort of being picked on. He's sitting alone, spoiler alert, sorry, it's too late. You're already on the journey. Just follow me along. And so he's sitting there and almost like he's getting picked on by these four like dark shapes, kind of specters. And at some point, and I'm not going to quote it exactly, but he wants to play sort of good guys and bad guys, except he looks more at the fierce deity as the bad guy. And there's a sort of interesting take of like, well, was Majora always the villain? Because when you fight Majora as fierce deity, it's not really even a fight. It's very quick. It's over. I mean, I didn't even have to try. And so, sort of lends to wonder, like, was this balance exactly how we're led to believe? Or, I even had this sort of curiosity, or when I first played it and I didn't know of any of the actual stories, I sort of wondered if Majora, for some reason I interpreted as a female character, what if that was like the Princess Zelda of another world, and then she turned evil, and then the fierce deity, which again, this is just me as a kid playing it through and sort of like imagining what the story could have been. But I think that's what's cool, is that there isn't a clear-cut definitive. The manga doesn't count, folks. It's non-canon. And so leaves it open for interpretation. What about you?
I think I've read somewhere, or someone pointed out, that the fierce deity has a sun and a moon on his chest, on his armor. And if you've done the Anju and Cafe side quest, which is that is the longest side quest in the game. It's very involved. It's awesome. It takes place across all 3 days in the game. Anju and Cafe have a sun and moon mask that when you combine it, it becomes the couple's mask. So is Majora representative of the moon, and is the fierce deity representative of the sun? Ooh,
that's interesting too. I also believe that on his armor they removed in the updated edition. He used to have an upside down Triforce on his outfit. If you look at some of the old artwork, it always has him with an upside down Triforce, which everyone's like, is that the piece in the middle, or is there another piece? And again, those two characters, because they're so powerful, they're really interesting.
You're not kidding about that boss fight. I've actually never fought Majora without the fierce deity's mask. Have you?
No, but I've heard that it's a much different experience.
Yes, because I have a player's guide, and it shows you like, okay, this is the weapon you need to use when this form of Majora. This is the weapon you use for this other form of Majora. The fierce deity's mask, it's over probably in less than 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I highly recommend, because you get to keep the mask after you beat the game. So I highly recommend to go back and defeat all the bosses. Well, except the one where you have to wear the giant's mask. You cannot fight as fierce deity Link. At the, oh my gosh. Help me out.
I didn't even know you. I didn't know you could go back and still use the mask. See, now I'm going to have to bring out Majora's Mask and take another play.
The canyon, that fight, Stone Tower.
A Stone Tower Temple?
Yes. So that one you cannot fight as the fierce deity unless they changed it in the 3DS version, because you have to wear the giant's mask and become Giant Link to fight that boss. But many times I have gone to fight Ottawa and the Swamp Palace or Swamp Temple. And if you fight him as the fierce deity, it's so easy. So ridiculously easy.
Also, side note for anyone listening, the Stone Tower Temple song is one of my favorites, in case you're writing it down on your list of notes you're taking on our show today. But yeah, no, I really love that song. Actually, so years ago, when you used to get like these cool reward points, I don't know if they still do it with Nintendo, I actually got the Majora's Mask soundtrack on CD from Nintendo, because I had turned in whatever the points were, whatever that system was at the time. And so I actually have the entire soundtrack for the game. And that's one of the songs is my go-to.
It's so good. It's so eerie. Is that what you like about it?
Yeah, it's just sort of this dark energy to it. I really appreciate it.
I think it encompasses a lot from that game too. So what about you? What's your next mystery? We need to get Robert Stack in here. That is a throwback for Unsolved Mysteries.
All right. So the next one for me is the Windfish.
Okay.
I think earlier in the episode I'd mentioned that the first Zelda game I owned was Link's Awakening, that I personally owned, and I was always fascinated by the Windfish. Always, and I don't want to spoil it too much, but the Windfish is obviously a very powerful creature, and I'm probably going to end up spoiling it anyway. Sorry, guys. But I always wondered, like, was he related to some of the other large flying whale leviathan creatures like Levias or maybe Jabu Jabu, or they have Oshus from Phantom Hourglass. And I sort of wondered, are they all related? Are they all the same? I think to an extent it was answered in a sense, because in Breath of the Wild there are definitely 3 large Leviathan style bone carcasses spread out. So I'm assuming some of the characters, but I always wondered who exactly the Windfish was. Was he representative of one of these other creatures in some of the other games?
So you know what that means, right? If he's related to those creatures, the ending of Link's Awakening is not correct, maybe?
Well, actually, was it Levias? Was that the one that had one of these creatures? They had a whole thing where they had like an infestation, or they had something.
Yes, and Skyward Sword.
Yeah, sounds strangely
Yes.
familiar of the Windfish, doesn't it? See,
Okay.
look, we're making big connections here.
I'm trying not
Scoop.
to ruin the ending of Link's Awakening, but if lots of things have changed, if that's the case.
Well, but that's it, right. But they're, the connections again. Like I said earlier, Zelda's really good about retelling a story and having sort of a fresh take, or it's a legend. So each telling, it's sort of the same story, but it's also a new story. And some of these elements that sort of drip forward, they also give you a subconscious little hit of nostalgia when you're sort of running across them, because they remind you of different things.
Okay, help me remember the Leviathans, the remains that you find in Breath of the Wild. How many locations are there?
3.
The number 3 is very common in this game.
Yep, there's always the initial 3 temples. Well, before Breath of the Wild, went rogue, but in general, yeah. So it's interesting, I think, and it provides a mystery. I think by the fact that they put these skeletons there, again, this is sort of hinting that there was a story from before, a legend from before, a tale from before that included, some of these creatures, and it leaves it up to you, to me, to sort of figure out which one's which. I think actually the Levias, there is one of the skeletons that looks very remarkably similar, because he had that unique sort of bony kind of structure on his forehead. But again, it just sort of leaves it to the imagination. Were they all related? Where did they go? Where did they come from?
I might not sleep tonight because I might decide to go ahead and research some things. So thank you
Google,
for that.
YouTube, and Reddit. Those are, go down the rabbit hole. What's your next one?
My next one is also from Majora's Mask again.
I'm seeing a trend here.
But it's sad. It's very sad.
Okay.
So, now, hear me out. You're going to say, well, Celeste, we see what happens in the game. But I have questions about this. So, I want to talk about the butler Deku's son. So, at the beginning of the game, when you're in what is referred to as a portal between Hyrule and Termina, when you're... are you the Deku Link, or you're just regular human Link, and then you then you spy this carcass, this dead tree, right? I can't remember if you've already transformed into the Deku Link.
Well, I know you transform into Deku Link pretty much at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
At the very beginning, that's the very first thing that sort of goes wrong in your life.
But I can't remember if it's before or after you see this stump of a Deku. But I think it's a little bit after, because Link does the cool flips. That's what sticks out to in my mind when you're young Link and you're hopping over. It's like, dang, Link picked up gymnastics since Ocarina of Time.
That's because they had the expansion pack for the Nintendo 64, so that extra graphic power, remember?
Yes, that was such a big deal. Oh my goodness, that was awesome piece of technology right there. So we know the reason Link has the Deku mask and Majora's Mask is because it is the spirit of the deceased Deku at the beginning of the game. So
Yes.
the reason Link can transform into a Deku, a Zora, and a Goron is because he's absorbed the living beings' spirits, souls in the mask. It's a little morbid, but that's what happens. So we know how Darmani III, who's the Goron, died, and we know how Macaw died. But we don't know how the butler's son died. And you find out that that Stump is the butler's son because during the credits, you see the butler Deku kind of mourning at it during the end credits. And it's very sad. It's very heartbreaking because the game at that point, there's a lot of celebration. Andrew and Cafe get married. People are enjoying the festival. So I'm really curious how... Darmani, I believe, fell from the cliff. He has a huge scar across his stomach. And then Macaw drowns, which I think is kind of ironic considering he's a Zora.
Yeah, let's not look too deeply into this here.
Okay, but I remember it being that, Macaw drowned. And I always had trouble accepting that. But what do you think happened with this Deku? Do you think the Skull Kid, under the influence of Majora, just killed him? Do you think he had been dead for a while? Or do you think it was very recent that he had passed away when you stumble upon him, his carcass?
Well, the butler, the Deku butler, we do a race with him, correct? Right? Mm-hmm. That's when we do the race with all like the booby traps and all that kind of stuff. Well, so in the official Nintendo Power Guide to Majora's Mask, as well as the official Nintendo Power Guide for the Legend of Zelda Collector's Disc on the GameCube, if you remember that. The section for the Deku Butler race, after saving the Deku Princess, is called The Butler Did It.
Okay,
so
tell me more.
Well, that's sort of it. But it's sort of going off that idea, anytime there's a murder mystery or anytime there's something, it's always the butler did it. And so I wonder if that's sort of alluding to the idea that maybe he had a hand in his own Deku Scrub's demise. It doesn't even have to necessarily be intentional. I mean, if you're doing this race over this crazy terrain that's very dangerous, could have been, how many times when you were the Deku Scrub did you fall off the edge of something or, so I'm thinking that maybe they're just sort of alluding that he had a hand in it. Not necessarily from nefarious means, but just that race was no joke.
Like an accident.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, I don't believe you can go back to that portal world from the clock tower. The door is sealed. You cannot go back to that forested area, correct?
Correct.
So now I'm wondering, did the Deku Butler's son die there? He must have. He looks like he's kind of rooted there. Were they racing right there? How did the butler access that area? We have more mysteries that are arising from this conversation.
I think it's time for us to get Scooby and the gang and go on this mystery hunt here.
Well, thank you for that. I did not know that about the butler did it. What's your next unsolved mystery?
Okay. Well, so this is actually probably they're the two mysteries that really always have gotten me in Zelda. One was the Song of Storms that I mentioned earlier, and the other one was the hand in the toilet. It appears in Majora's Mask. It's also at the Stockpot Inn at Oracle of Ages, and it's always sort of a part of this quirky trading game. Obviously, a hand in a toilet always needs paper of some kind, and I thought that was really cool. Sort of weird, sort of creepy, sort of different. What's interesting is there's a third hand in the toilet, which actually has a name. And this is doing my research. Once I got real curious about this, doing my research, I believe it's pronounced Phony, Phony, Phoni. So there's this guy named Colin, and he wants Link to deliver a love note to another person who's up in Skyloft. And so you sort of get a choice on whether to deliver it to that person or deliver it to the hand in the toilet, which is female. Feeny is her name. I'm really trying to pronounce it properly at least once. And, so basically depending on the outcome depends on what happens. And so those three different sort of instances, I think those are just interesting. Where did the hand come from? In my mind, there was no answer. There was no possible way that I would ever find this out. And then I found it out. So the whole reason I started this episode, I ended up getting the answer to the one mystery that I wanted to know. Would you like me to share it?
Yeah.
So according to Shigeru Miyamoto himself, when he was giving an interview, he says, it's actually something from a Japanese ghost story, not a specific ghost story. There are some ghost stories in Japan where when you're sitting in the bathroom in the traditional style of the Japanese toilet, the fears that, and I'm paraphrasing here, a hand is actually starting to grab you from beneath. It's a very scary story. So, yeah.
I'm not going to be able to use the restroom like normally again.
Well, and that's really cool. That's a really cool way of putting, something from a cultural story or a cultural kind of thing and making it sort of fun and silly. I mean, instead of it grabbing and hurting you, it's asking for a note. It wants to write something because, of course, this lone hand would need some paper. And I think that's a way to take something that is perhaps a traditionally scary thing and making it sort of fun and quirky. Zelda does that a lot, I think.
I think when you give the hand the paper in Majora's Mask, I think it like makes a sigh of relief or something.
Yes. Mm-hmm. and that's what, again, it's turning something that maybe, I guess, from a historical standpoint was sort of scary, but I mean, there's a much more scary creatures in Legend of Zelda than that poor hand. But that was one of those things as a kid when I first stumbled in. I'm just running around exploring, and all of a sudden there's this random hand popping out of a toilet, and I'm like, well, that's. At first I thought I was going to have to fight it, and I was like, and then when I didn't, it just made this sort of interesting, fun, quirky kind of thing. Because when you're a kid, oh, a toilet hand, haha, it's sort of funny. But do you have any other creepy characters that sort of stand out for you in the series, or any creepy moments?
Before I say that, I just want to know why that bathroom does not have a door in Majora's Mask. That's
maybe
creepy.
It's a curtain. Maybe there's a curtain somewhere, and they just.
Maybe so. It's right near the kitchen. That bothers me. It's also so far away from the bedrooms. If you're having an emergency in the middle of the night, you're in trouble, and you don't have the decency of a door. So that's creepy to me.
Well, I mean, Clocktown is trying to throw a party in the middle of an apocalypse, so maybe, their head's not really where it should be.
I love that. Oh gosh, creepy characters. I guess, so he wasn't listed, but when I was researching Unsolved Mysteries of Zelda, I hate to say he's creepy because I feel kind of bad for him. He doesn't have a name in Ocarina of Time, but he does have a name in Majora's Mask, so I will just use his name in Majora's Mask, Grog, who I don't believe he's named in Ocarina of Time. He's the young man who seems kind of troubled. He sits under the tree at night, the tree when you walk into Kakariko Village. He's a little creepy because he has very piercing white eyes, and he's shirtless. He's wearing kind of cool looking, I call them punk pants. And in Majora's Mask, he has a mohawk. In Ocarina of Time, he's bald. But gosh, see, I'm bringing up a mystery that I didn't even have listed. But when you said creepy characters, so he is the Cuckoo Lady's brother, who Anju is based off of in Majora's Mask, the redheaded woman in Kakariko Village. And Grog's father is the head carpenter who stands under the same tree during the daytime. And I don't know if she's technically a witch, but the potion lady in Kakariko Village, I don't know if she is Grog's mother or grandmother, but if you do that fetch quest where you have to gather all these different items, and you meet Grog in the Lost Woods. And spoiler alert, if you're a Hylian and you go to the Lost Woods, you're going to become a Stalfos. So we assume that that's what happened to him. But I guess the mystery to me would be, for this creepy character, what's the family dynamic? Is he just troubled? Is he sad? Because he says some kind of, I don't know if disturbing is the right word. Doesn't he say, my father's disgusting, you must be disgusting too?
He's very melancholy.
Yes. I think he has, a little bit of sadness. I don't know if it's okay, if I had to guess, maybe his dad wants him to be a carpenter and he doesn't want to be a carpenter and he's kind of lost. I don't know. What do you think? Now I've totally veered off in a different direction.
Here we go down the rabbit hole. Well, it almost seems to me, and this has nothing to do with the game itself, but he's a character that sort of, it's like he's going through a transition. It reminds me of a vampire that's about to turn.
Oh.
Like it just feels like he's going down the road to turn to like the shadow, or, especially with his expression, the fact that he's sort of only lurking around at a certain time. They don't really go too much further with it, but that's just that's the kind of character in any story where it's just like, maybe they started out good, but then you can see them sort of switch teams, I guess, and play for the villains.
Oh, that was I didn't even think about that. Well, since I came up with a mystery on the spot, would you like to name another one of your mysteries?
Well, I had sort of one extra mystery that I just sort of, it was like my honorable mention kind of mystery. Mm-hmm. And that was Snow Peak Mansion. That's in Twilight Princess.
Yes.
Well, one, it's called a mansion. And maybe it's a mansion to those two giant creatures, that are living in the building. But really, if you look at it, it's basically a fortress. There's cannons. It's obviously very large. There's rooms with armaments. There's rooms, that has I think a chapel. There's this coat of arms that is a little unique, but is actually featured in the same tower that Zelda's in. And so it's just sort of one of those mysteries. Why did it have cannons? If you look, most of the places in Hyrule didn't have cannons. I think when you're doing some stuff with was it the sky or something? Nowhere in Hyrule land-based had cannons except for that area. And I'm sure the creators did it as sort of like a game mechanic. They were trying to use it because you use the cannons to knock down walls and stuff like that. But it was one of those things of well, why was it abandoned? What was the story behind it? Why was it there so far? The kingdom in the north, why was it so far up there? And again, me being the kind of history person that I am, I always love to hear where something came from.
The origin story, huh?
Yeah, origin stories. I love them.
I love Snow Peak Mansion. I love games with mansions that you can explore. Did you ever play Castlevania 64?
No.
Okay,
Do tell.
So don't laugh at me. That's the only Castlevania I've ever played.
Oh.
So,
I mean, considering that I haven't played it, your street cred is still higher than mine.
But there's a villa in there, and I just love going to the different rooms. And Snow Peak Mansion reminds me a little bit of that. I love just opening doors. Okay, is there going to be a bedroom? Is there going to be a bathroom? Is there going to be a storage room, a dining room? So I love it. I'm very nosy. I don't do this in real life. I don't go busting into people's houses to see what they look like on the inside, but I'm always curious. Gosh, I wonder how they decorate it. And
I wonder what's in their medicine cabinet. No, not that. Okay.
And Snow Peak Mansion, I wonder, do you think it's in ruins because the Yeti characters just, I don't want to say they don't care, but maybe it doesn't bother them. Do they like that aesthetic to it?
I almost feel like they were, and again, this is why, we create the stories in our own minds. I almost feel like they were maybe outdoors, they were wandering, maybe they lived in a cave. And then once that place was abandoned, even though it was in ruin, maybe whoever lived there before lost the battle and abandoned the post, but they, being creatures of the snow, were perfectly comfortable, even though they do have that nice warm room and stuff in the middle. But, almost like they took it as is, they don't need fancy things or big, giant, powerful creatures. So they don't need to improve on the building. They can defend themselves. They could live in caves if they really wanted to. And so I just think they sort of took hold of the place. And who knows, listeners, maybe you guys can tell us if they provided some of their backstory. But I do know for a fact that the place itself, they didn't really truly give the story on it. But another thing that you said actually sort of jogged my mind. So you're talking about, games with mansions. You went to Castlevania. I immediately went to Clue, the old board game.
Yes.
I was so obsessed with this game only because I wanted to use the secret passages. Like that, because you can get from the conservatory to the kitchen or whatever.
They link.
And I'm so much obsessed with that even to this day that, I think I told you I purchased a home and it has a basement that I want to finish, and I want to put one of those like little hidden doors. It's like a bookcase or something that opens up. Like, I am determined, if there's one thing I do in that room, it will be like a bookcase or like a secret door because there's an extra tiny little room that really doesn't have space for anything, but I've always wanted it, and by golly, I will do it.
Can you do me a favor and put a coat of arms or a suit of armor in there, please? I should say not coat of arms. That's much smaller. That's not what I want. I want a suit of armor, not a coat of armor. An
entire suit of. Maybe I'll do one. Actually, the mansion in Snow Peak had a lot of suits of armor. Maybe I'll use it as a reference guide.
Yes, and you have to get the ball and chain.
Yes.
Oh my God, that's a great mystery, Carlos. So my last mystery, well, you'll see after this one. The Book of Medora's origins. So you talked about A Link to the Past earlier, and so I believe I obtained the comic for A Link to the Past before I actually played the game. I don't know if you have ever seen it. It's very large.
The comic for it, no?
Yeah. So when I was about 8 years old, and I was at Walmart with my mom, and this was before super centers were as prevalent and omnipresent as they are now. It was I call it a regular Walmart. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, where it wasn't so much a grocery store and everything. It was just sort of the Kmart version.
Exactly. Yeah, they had like a radio grill, and we were passing by the electronics section, and just out in the middle of the aisle on a box, there was this Zelda comic, and I convinced my mom to buy it for me, and I still have it to this day. And they reference the Book of Medora in there, and they make it sound cooler in the comic version, right? Because in the game, I'm embarrassed to say how long it took me to figure out how to obtain it. Do you remember how you obtain it?
Yes, I believe you have to charge into a bookcase.
Yes.
A very, very simple puzzle, but
it is very simple. But if you haven't played, if it's a game that you put down for a little while and you pick up again and you haven't played it in a while, you might be wondering, what the heck do I do?
I've struggled with some what everyone else finds to be a simple puzzle. We all have those moments because, I think sometimes we tend to look for an even more complicated answer instead of just looking at the very simplest way to approach a problem. But that's funny. That's awesome, though.
I was looking for a librarian. I was looking for a ladder. I was basically saying, I need an adult. Someone please help me get this book off the bookshelf. But so this book helps you translate some runes in the desert. And this book is seen only in A Link to the Past. So is there a singular author, or did multiple people contribute to it? That's what I want to know. And apparently it houses all these stories, all this lore. It's basically like a Bible / encyclopedia for Hyrule. So that seems like a big deal, right? That seems like a very important book. And I also want to know, is it a spell book? Because Link uses what's called the Wish of Opening to open the entrance to the Desert Palace.
Well, so my first rapid take, you just described it as a book, that contains all these stories and histories and stuff. If you ever look at your Hyrule Historia and you look at the Book of Medora, they're basically, I think I'm just, shooting at the dark here. it almost seems like they took that idea or the way it looks from that, because it's almost like it's the same thing, right? And so I remember when I first saw the Hyrule Historia come out, I literally thought of the Book of Madura. So I believe when they're reading, so I believe the magic is coming from the runes that are carved into the surface, but I think the book is what's translating the runes on the surface. Because you also do that because there's 3 pendants you can also get. And the only way you can get them is with the book, and you have to read it. And then once you're able to read it, then that's when you get the power of the pendants. Because you have the one that does the little fireballs and all that kind of stuff. And so I think anytime there's supposed to be an ancient language, there's probably some magic to it. But I think in that particular instance, I think you're just doing what the stone tablet or wall or whatever it is telling you to do. But I've always liked the Book of Madura because when I was young, obviously I wasn't as good at defeating enemies and opponents, and I really relied on getting those pendants, the one with the little fireball, particularly to help me beat a bunch of enemies. Matter of fact, in the ice temple or ice dungeon, there's a lot of slipping and sliding. There's these, I don't know if they were supposed to be like ducks or I don't know what they were. But they would be sliding all over the place, and I was having trouble maintaining my footing. So I would just whip out that power and sort of burn everything in the room. And so the Book of Madura was like one of my key go-to items that I need to get in that game.
And you don't use it very often in the game, but the fact that they based Hyrule Historia, which I have read before, you're onto something there, Carlos, that it looks like the Book of Madura. Also, who were the Madura? Is it a person? Is it like a deity? Was it a race?
Yeah. It's funny because there's so many of these extra little cultures. Breath of the Wild has the Zunai that everybody's always talking about. And they always just give you a little tidbit. Matter of fact, at the beginning of A Link to the Past, the original version, I think they called them the 7 wise men. They didn't call them sages. And then I think for the re-release, they changed it to the sages to match up. But again, when you're first playing the game, and none of the other titles have been released, and you just know about these 7 wise men and their war that happened before. Again, it's just sprinkling these little tidbits, and it makes us try to fill in the gaps. The Book of Madura, I just imagined, there was some old wizards guild that just sort of kept note of everything, and then hid the book when Ganon was sort of taking over everything for safekeeping. And by hiding the book, I mean put it in the library on top.
Yes, that Celeste can't figure out how to access.
Nobody would know.
So, did you read the comic ever?
No, I've always had on the list to get the manga and all that kind of stuff. I never have. I'm a purist. What can I say?
Well, in the comic for A Link to the Past, so I read it before I got to this point in the game. The library is on fire, and Link saves the librarian, and the librarian has saved the Book of Madura. So when I was looking for the Book of Madura, I fully expected that library to be on fire in the game.
Oh, that's pretty. Sometimes those comic book writers, those storytellers, they take a few liberties with the story.
Yes,
that's pretty funny though. I think it was Star Wars. I know that when they did like the writing for The Force Awakens, they added extra stuff and extra scenes. And I think they do that a lot. Anytime they novelize or turn anything to print, I think they try to flesh out the story. And that just seems like maybe that's one of those cases. But I could totally see expecting a fire, expecting a librarian at the bare minimum, a librarian. Yeah.
Do you have any other mysteries before I give my bonus one?
No, I think Snow Peak was sort of the sort of extra round that I have. But again, that Song of Storms paradox to this day, because I think out of all of them, I think you could find an answer for any of the other mysteries that I've mentioned, but I don't think there is, nor will there be, nor maybe should there be an answer to the Song of Storms paradox. I think it's just something fun and something to, do a little brain twister when you're playing through.
I'll never be able to think of that song the same way again. But Carlos, I have one that's a little silly.
Okay, bring it.
In Ocarina of Time, if you beat Malon's time at Lon Lon Ranch, she awards you with a cow, and she says, I'm going to have it delivered to your house. And if you remember, Link's house is a literal tree house. It is inside a tree, and you have to climb a ladder to get into the top part of the tree. And there is indeed a cow waiting for you inside your house. How did Malon get this cow into Link's house?
Well, that's an amazing question. She probably hired the same company that put the cows in the holes in the ground. Whatever that service is, maybe if you played Majora's Mask, I believe there's aliens or ghosts or somebody trying to like zap up cows. So maybe they have maybe they have a service in Hyrule. So for just a few rupees, you too can move a cow anywhere you want in Hyrule. When I was a kid, I never really questioned why there were like cows in holes. I just would hear the moo. I felt really cool that I found something. But looking back on it, child Link barely fit through those holes. I don't know how the cows did.
Isn't there like some kind of something with cows and folklore or urban legends? I feel like there's something.
No, or maybe yes. I mean, I think my grandfather, went cow tipping when he was young, but that's about as far as.
Did someone tip the cow too hard and it fell down this hole?
Yeah, no, I don't know. But I find it super interesting that, they actually, Zelda has a thing with certain animals, with the cuckoos, if you hit them too much, they're going to do something. With the cows, they're always hidden somewhere. Didn't they have something going on with pigs in Wind Waker? I can't remember.
Oh yeah, you can feed them, and like from the spoils bag, you can get some food, and they'll dig up treasure for you. And I think they'll hurt you if you attack them.
Yeah, so there we go. So like with the cuckoos, am I saying that right? Cuckoos. It's funny how we all pronounce different things in the game differently, and then we hear someone else say it, and it's a little different. But I believe it was in Link to the Past. There's a cuckoo that you can turn into a person. I believe in the town. And yes, and I think it's a she. I believe she mentions that basically the main cuckoo in the square, the one that's inside the weather vane, like watches down and knows. And that's basically why if you attack the cuckoos, like you get attacked, because he sees and sends the other ones to come get you.
And she's in the light world when you transform her, right?
Yeah, she's a cuckoo in one of the houses. Like I think you hit a jar or something. And unfortunately, like you're trying to, get all the cuckoos to come attack you. They don't. And then I think you sprinkle some of the magic dust on her, and then she turns into a person and tells you that little tidbit of information.
Now we have another mystery. How did she become a cuckoo? And how did she get into a jar?
Sometimes the world will never know. But again, I mean, what a cool little thing to add, just to give you that little extra storyline. I mean, think about it. The bird in the center of town is watching over you. That's not something that's necessary to the story, not something that necessarily furthers the plot in itself or the quest in any way, shape, or form. But what it does do is it helps flesh out the world that you're immersed in and make it more believable. So it's really enjoyable.
I do love that. And it's silly. I love it. I love how it's like, maybe it's not meant to be taken so seriously like I am trying to do. But Carlos, is there any other type of mystery or anything else you'd like to say about this episode?
Well, I mean, we're still looking for David, so that's the biggest mystery yet. We're still trying to find him. I've been looking around, but no, I mean, I think we covered it. I just, I think every game, there's so many more. When I was trying to come up with the ones that I wanted to list, I actually just tried to make it so that I wasn't just going over one game, because in one game alone, you could do a top 5, a top 10, a top 20. The amount of detail and energy that is put into each and every game, adding Easter eggs, adding little things that you can find. And I'm actually super excited to see what the listeners come up with, because I'm sure that there's going to be some that I knew of and that that I sort of been curious about. And I'm sure there's going to be some that never even crossed my mind. And I'm super excited to see what they come up with.
And thank you for coming up with this topic, because this is what I love about Zelda. I love hearing people's theories on things. So I'm really looking forward to hearing not only people's favorite unsolved mysteries, but maybe some responses to the ones we brought up. Maybe they'll have answers for us or bring up different perspectives.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And again, that's one of the cool things about this podcast, because I really feel like the listeners are a part of it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of their contributions actually, I think, have spurned some of our conversations and some of our ideas. It's like we're feeding each other's minds, and it's a beautiful thing.
And a really cool place where you can continue the conversation even without leaving comments on the episodes would be our Discord channel. And I believe David has it linked on the website. If not, I apologize, and I can tweet about it so people
If not,
can
that is just another mystery that we're going to have to solve.
But we will figure it out. And if you want to listen to our other episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast. You can go to our website, anotherzeldapodcast.com, where you can also read our blogs. I think you should.
Yeah, no, there a lot of good people coming up with ideas and have some interesting things to say. And not all these things get to make it onto air or get mentioned about. But if you have some downtime, you're sitting in a doctor's office waiting for a visit, or waiting for the bus, or sitting on a train, I think they're probably about 5 to 8 minutes long. Quick little reads, and I think you'll enjoy them. I really do.
I do too. Well, Carlos, if listeners would like to follow you somewhere on the internet, where can they find you?
Well, they can find me on Twitter. I'm the Lost Hylian on Twitter. I'm also the Lost Hylian on Instagram. And so I think those would be the two main places you can find me. I'm pretty good about responding. So if you tweet at me or Instagram at me or message me of any way, I'm definitely quick to respond. And please, if you guys have any blog ideas that you want to share, anything you'd like me to write about, to me, it's a team effort, this AZP journey that we're on.
Be careful. They might say, which cuckoo is your favorite in the whole series?
Yeah. No, they might be like, oh, so how many times did Celeste play Castlevania or whatever game it is?
Oh, God, just the one Castlevania. And listeners, you can find me on Twitter at FairyCrypt. We would love to have you follow us on Twitter at Another Zelda Pod, and on Instagram, we're Another Zelda Podcast. Instagram's David's baby, because he curates it with special photos that he takes. It's really cool. I love it. I love the aesthetic that he has going for it. But until next time, hopefully we will find David. We will solve that mystery. But until next time, we'll see everybody later. Okay, bye.
Adios.